Welcome back to Air Quality Matters. We already have the tools and knowledge we need to make a difference to the quality of the air we breathe in our built environment. The conversations we have and how we share what we know is the key to our success. I'm Simon Jones, and coming up, a conversation with Liz Mail, founder and MD of Liz Mail Consulting, author and OBE. Liz is a specialist in public relations and communications in the built environment. She and her team help changemakers, purpose-led innovators, and thought leaders in construction, property, and the built environment more broadly. Communicating the complex and technical is a challenge and at the same time the key to driving meaningful change in our sphere. I've known Liz for years and blame her almost entirely for setting up on my own, so it was revenge time. Seriously though, Liz is a mentor in this space to many, and her influence on the sector, recognised with an OBE for services to construction, cannot be overestimated. Her insight into the sector is brilliant. How we communicate change, risk, and innovation and more is worth listening to. So, if you want to understand the how, the importance of storytelling, and more, this is the podcast for you. Recorded live from Future Build in London, I really hope you enjoy this one. Don't forget to check out the sponsors in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net. This is a conversation with Liz Mail. I think because I'm banging on about this all the time on the podcast about we've got to get better at communicating technical subject matter, and none more so than ventilation and aircraft. I'm sure it's not unique, but I mean, when we look at communications in any technical field, and like you've been involved in this field for a while, particularly the built environment, what does comms look like in 2025, or perhaps what does it look like and what should it look like is the question.
Okay, fine. What it looks like is currently, I would say, is better than it did when I started my career. You know, it's over 30 years ago, but it's still patchy. It's patchy and it's inconsistent. And the most important thing in communications is about consistency, because consistency builds trust. There's countless research projects on this. You could go and look at what Ipsos Mori have published on the subject, Edelman, their trust index. If you look at what creates trust in a sector or in a business, it's consistency. And what does comms look like right now in built environment? Very inconsistent. You know, some people good at it, strong branding, strong messaging, engaging stories, clear technical content that is verified and is totally reliable. You know, code for construction product information level verification. And then you've got the rest, which is not so good. And actually, you've got large amounts of the industry which doesn't communicate at all. And that is either through the fact that they feel that they've got nothing particularly to say, which is never true, or they are lacking in confidence and don't know how to go about telling people about it, or they're just busy and it's just not at the top of their priority list. So there's all sorts of different reasons in there.
And that consistency thing, is that often borne out because people either didn't plan and strategize properly at the beginning, or just give up too early? I mean, you see this all the time in communications, that people think that you can do a conference or an exhibition or a marketing piece, and somehow that you're done. Like, that's it, job done. But if you know, if things like Brexit and MAGA and these things have taught us anything, is that effective communications is often just fixing a position and repeat consistently, building a frame and a story around something, whether it's nonsense or not, it's that consistency of messaging is absolutely critical, isn't it?
If it's nonsense, it'll be found out that it's
Yeah.
nonsense. So actually, I wouldn't
hope.
ever advise that.
Yeah.
But you're right. I say to clients, you know, number one, saying something once, you might as well never have said it at all. It's just not worth it. You know, if you're going to commit to being a communicator, you commit. And two, you will get sick of the messaging and the story like way sooner than your audience will. And you will be shocked at how many times you have to repeat, and have, as you said, consistency of messaging. You can say the same things in different ways. You can bring it to life in different ways. But actually, you're right. It's about strategy. So when we start working with any organisation, and it doesn't matter if it's a sole trader, small startup, innovative startup, or a big international, you know, global business, same principles. You start out by thinking, one, why am I communicating? What am I trying to achieve for business? Now, personally, on this point, if you're just communicating to sell more stuff, don't be surprised if you find it very hard. If you're actually communicating vision, purpose, values, passion, learning, you'll get much higher engagement. But know, first of all, what it is you're trying to achieve. Okay. Second step, know, therefore, who are the most important people for you to talk to. And quite often the answer that will come back to us are, no, we want to talk to developers and house builders, say. And I go, okay, so specifically what type of developer or house builder? And actually, the more granular you can get, you know, you can really, really pinpoint specific small groups of people who will probably deliver you 80% of the value in terms of achieving your objectives that you've set at the beginning.
Is that where you hear things like personas being described, where you're trying to actually imagine the person that you're talking? So rather than saying we're trying to communicate this to building professionals or major developers, those kind of conversations, too big, and even engineers within those it's specifically what person am I imagining you talking to? And people might feel that that's too narrow, that you might be missing somebody by doing that, but it's not a trope, is it? It's a very valuable part of marketing and communications, is understanding who the person is you're trying to communicate with.
If you don't get into their socks, you know, walk a mile in their shoes, as the saying goes, you know, if you can't genuinely find that empathy with them and understand what's keeping them awake at night, what's on their boardroom table, what are the decisions they're having to make, what are the things that they're Googling and trying to find out, who, you know, where do they hang out, where do they get their information from, what are they influenced by, who are they influenced by, until you genuinely get into that psyche, into their real lived experience, how can you pitch properly to them a message that will resonate with them? Because we are just bombarded with noise, messaging all the time, communications all around us all the time, and it's just too much. But sometimes something will cut through. So my perspective on it is you laser focused on the business objectives you want to achieve, and then laser focused on the people you need to talk to. If it's house builders, okay, so are we talking volume house builders? Are we talking regional offices of volume house builders? Are we talking small regional, you know, innovators? Are we talking really, you know, small SME builders, thousands of them? Where are you pitching it? Because I can tell you they are as different as chalk and cheese. You think that you put them all in one big lump, but they're worried about different things. They talk about different things. They share different things. They hang out in different places. They will be tuned into different messaging. And actually, I mean, that's just one of the, what I call the tribes. But, you know, if you think about architects or engineers or multidisciplinary consultants or test houses, or you just think of all the different parts that make up the ecosystem that is construction. I have to know in my job, I have to understand all those different tribes. I have to know where they hang out. I have to know what they're interested in, what they're talking about. And I have to even know the language they might use for exactly the same thing. And it's bonkers because we don't all actually use the same language for the same things.
No, we do not. No.
So that's the second point, is to be really laser focused. And you're right, it will mean that you are not going to be able to cover everyone, but that's fine. Focus for 6 months, 12 months on really, really making an impact and getting engagement and genuine empathy and building relationships in one sector. Know specifically and check, how's that going for us? How is that impacting on our business and our objectives and our purpose and everything we're trying to achieve? If it ain't working, then look at another part of the market and say, right, okay, maybe we should put a little bit more attention into that.
Yeah. But I suppose that negative feedback you won't ever get if you haven't drilled into that persona properly, because if you're just doing blanket communications, there's no marker for success. You're just shouting into the void.
You are.
Yeah. And you've got no idea whether that's resonating with somebody. But if you've designed your communications around a persona or a group of personas that meet a business objective, you can then audit that in a way that whether it's being successful or not. If you don't do that, you've got no chance of measuring it. It's like publishing an ad in a magazine that's got nothing to do with your sector. It's impossible to figure out whether that landed with anybody.
Exactly.
Unless it's a code or something they entered to get a deal or something. But that aside, you'd have no sense of what people's thoughts or feelings were about that communication. What A and B profiling certain language to see what resonates more and better and refining. And particularly in this world of social media, and digital marketing, we've got an ability to capture an awful lot of information.
So much more now. I mean, I don't want to overcomplicate it.
No, sure.
Any business, even a tiny business, can do targeted communications. You don't have to be, digitally A/B testing everything and all that jazz. You can be as sophisticated as you want, really, with it. But fundamentally, if you just always keep in mind that principle of knowing who are the people that will, it's that old Pareto principle, isn't it? 80-20 rule. Who are the people that will generate 80% of the benefit?
Yeah.
Who are the 20% that will generate 80% of the benefit? And focus on those 20%. It takes a bit of time to figure it out, and you test it and you see how it works. And
as you say, be consistent. I mean, and you see that so often people think consistency is a 6-week run at something. Then they're just wondering why. And somebody put this to me really well not so long ago, was that even because I'd worked quite a bit on LinkedIn, and even my most successful comms projects on LinkedIn, because most of it's strategic, is still only reaching a fraction of the audience. So you can repeat the exact same message, and often half the people that see it may not have seen it the last time. So you think you're being repetitive, but as you said, it's not repetitive. It's only repetitive to you because you know the scheduling. It's going out over a period of time, and this is the messaging and this is the track. But everybody else from the outside is going, oh, look, so and so saying something interesting that's resonated with me again.
So I found out something from one of my colleagues. She's an absolute whiz at social media, in particular LinkedIn. And I didn't know, actually, I'll share this. I had no idea the algorithm, the way it works. LinkedIn, you might say you're followed by I don't know, say you've got 1,000 followers or connections, okay? You post something on LinkedIn doesn't mean that goes to the full 1,000 people who follow you. LinkedIn will serve it up to say 100, and it will wait and see how people respond. Do they like it? Do they share it? Do they comment on it? Do they repost it? If they do, in the first hour of it going live, they'll serve it up to the next 100.
Yeah.
And so it goes. I didn't know this until recently. My colleague was explaining to me how it worked, and I was just like, my God, that's just incredible. So, little tip, get people to engage in the first hour.
Yeah, and that's and there's 3 or 4 tips I give to people when you're doing social media, particularly LinkedIn, because there are 4 or 5 things in a post that get that algorithm moving.
Yes.
The first one is clicking and expanding the link. So good ad copy, something that hooks you and makes you want to read the rest of it, is incredibly important.
Yes.
It needs to be long enough to create a bit of dwell time with because it tracks your mouse and it knows how long you're reading it for. You then need a call to action that takes people to the comments, because when it sees you looking at the comments, it refers extra engagement. If you can get them to comment in the first hour, that is a multiplier effect. And if you can get them to click on a link, it has so there's these series of actions that it's tracking everybody to. So the best thing you can do on LinkedIn, I've found, is be available the first hour that you post, so that you can comment live to people that interact with it, because that will give it more of a chance. So you make time in your day that when you're, and if you can only do it once a week or twice a week, that's fine. But if your job is to create framing and narrative on that particular channel, be available for the half hour after you've posted it, because that will accelerate. And you're absolutely right. You can have 15,000, 30,000 followers. It doesn't matter. It will serve it up to a range of people, test the water. And if nothing's happening, you might as well have not bothered.
I know, it's weird,
amazing.
Isn't it weird?
Yeah.
So there you go. And anyone can do that.
Yeah.
But your point was about consistency and repetition. So then, you can look at other ways of saying the same thing and repeating it and seeing if you can try different ways to get that engagement.
Yeah. But you've got to understand what you're trying to say. And I think that's what you were saying at the beginning is so important. If you don't understand who you're trying to reach and the framing and narrative that you're trying to create, you then can't do that iterative process of tweaking, because you're not doing it in the context of anybody. You're just going, well, that didn't work, try to say something completely different. Whereas if you've got somebody in mind, you're far better off. A bit like us having a conversation. If I'm trying to communicate something with you and it's not quite landing, I'm trying to figure out how I say it slightly differently to get it to land.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can't do that unless I'm in front of you talking to you. And it's similar in comms, I guess, when you're trying to reach out into the void. You've got to have that person in mind. You're going, wonder if saying it this way to that person is going to hit that note with them.
Yeah, so that's why we would typically, my role is genuinely understand the business drivers for this, the purpose behind doing this work, and what, how does a client want to achieve their purpose, achieve their mission, change the world for the better, the built environment for better. Really understand that, then understand specifically who they need to be talking to, research it if necessary, go out, engage with those groups, listen to what they're saying, bring it back, refine your messaging, and thereafter just become a fantastic storyteller. Be creative, do things that are engaging and fun and that are, like exactly as you've described, Simon, they are totally in tune with your target audience.
Yeah, and beyond the classic marketing ad copy, from my conversations with you, you see storytelling as a central tenet to good comms, don't you?
Completely.
Yeah,
we are hardwired as a species to communicate via stories, We remember, our memory is based on stories. We repeat stories to each other. It's the simplest, oldest, most basic psychological function of human beings is to be storytellers. And there's a brilliant book, Christopher Booker wrote it, and it's back to the 90s, I think. You can still find it as a bestseller. And it talks about effectively sort of 7 archetypes, 7 typical stories, story structures that you can follow. And these are so ingrained. I mean, almost every Netflix series you've ever watched, every movie you've ever been to, every book, fiction book you've ever read will somewhere or another link back into these sort of 7 structures of a story. Every play Shakespeare wrote is the same principle. And once you understand that, you can begin to sort of say, well, actually, that's really interesting. I've got a very technical topic I want to talk about, but how can I bring this to life through a literally, time-honoured way of creating an engaging story that's memorable, that's got some emotion behind it, and therefore will stick in people's minds and they'll repeat it, and it will get that whole word of mouth thing going.
Yeah. And I think the risk is people see storytelling as cheesy, that there's these aren't all lines about a hero and a pain point and overcoming an obstacle. There is all of that, but I think most of us instinctively know. You just think back to the last conference you were at. You'll remember, you'll have forgotten 99% of everything that happened at that conference, but the things you will remember were the stories, that the speaker that told a technical point through a story.
Yes.
That's your brain is literally hardwired to hold stories, not bullet points and fact sheets and U values and air change rates. Forget it. But they will remember something that spoke to something that resonated with you.
And not a sales story.
No.
If you think you're going to go out there and say, well, what I did first was I did this, and then I did that, and then I did the other, and it was a massive success.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to go, well, bully for you. And they will, you throw in a couple of brand names and a logo, and you've lost everyone instantly.
Yeah.
Instead,
you're talking about 3/4 of the case studies that you see from manufacturers out there, Liz, aren't you, basically?
Yeah, basically, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, turn it on its head. Talk about your customer, your client as the hero of the story. Okay. Talk about the challenge that they were facing, and they come to you for a technical solution. So my God, have they had a challenge? They didn't just wake up one morning and decide to, get some expertise on air quality. They've been battling a problem for a while. It may be a regulatory compliance issue. It could be their client that's, putting pressure on them. It could be that it's part of their technical passion and mission to improve. There'll be a reason behind this, and they will have been working really hard at this. And suddenly, they set out on a journey, excuse the cliche, but it's part of these archetypes. They set out on a quest to solve a problem, to slay a dragon, to overcome a hurdle. Watch any Grand Designs TV program, and it has the same structure. It has the hero of the story. They've got a vision, they've got an idea, they've got a concept of what they want to do. They set out, and about 2/3 through in the program, Kevin McLeod will look at the television and go, well, it's not going to work, is it?
It's not going to work, yeah.
That's called jeopardy.
Yeah.
The technical term for it is jeopardy. It's built into every single plot.
Yeah, they'll find a crisis.
There's a point of crisis.
Yeah.
It looks like the end of the world. Frodo is going to succumb to the ring of Sauron and, all that jazz. There's always a point of jeopardy where it looks like your hero is not going to succeed. And then in you come. You come with a solution, with some ideas. You got talking to them. And at the end, there's a resolution and there's a success, but the client takes the credit. They have achieved this. Isn't it amazing? And this is what their customer has said. And they can bask in the glory of having chosen the right consultant or the right technology or the right solution. So when you actually look at a case study like that, instead of the first word of the first line saying Acme and Technologies Inc. did X, Y, and Z project in Ashby de la Zouche, instead it's this customer went through this process, and your company name actually might not appear until paragraph 4, 5, 6. You come in later in the story. Now, from a customer's perspective, reading that, I'm looking at it and I'm going, wow, that sounds like me. I've been through that problem before. That's really interesting. How did they solve it? Oh, well, it's on this guy's website. Actually, they probably got a solution here. That's really interesting. And it's a whole different way of telling stories, looking at it through the lens of who you're talking to. Know who you're talking to.
Yeah. And you've built this structure and this narrative and the framing for organisations more broadly that everything's leaning to that as well. It's not just one case study or one story. There's a series of actions over a period of time, creating this funnel of context, if you like, that's building the narrative around that particular organisation's goal or strategy.
It's demonstrating your expert status over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, I say many times, people do not just do business with people. People do business with experts, particularly in construction and built environment. We are looking for expertise. We're always on the search for the person who can help us with complex, complicated, wicked problems. We're looking for the experts. There may not be best practice or good practice to look at. It may be emerging practice, but we're always looking for the people who can help us. So if you have got a reputation as someone who, has consistently helped organisations through really complex problems and given them the credit of that, and you've shown your expertise in different ways, and you do that consistently over time, and we're talking 18 months, 2 years of consistency, you will build a reputation as an expert and as someone who puts the client's interests first and who genuinely knows your stuff and can solve difficult problems.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And my mind's eye is going to experts as well when you're saying that. And I'm thinking that the last thing you want to do every time you speak to an expert or read something for an expert, they're flip-flopped to another, right? So that consistency thing doesn't just run from the consistency of output. No. There's got to be a consistency in messaging as well, and framing and words. Because what you don't want is every time you speak to that expert, it's like, well, the last time, I'm sure you lose confidence in an expert if they're not consistent.
Yes.
Right? So the same has got to be that for communications when you're trying to build up that expertise, or for people to trust you about something that's not obvious or technical or is always going to be outside of their sphere of expertise. Yeah. They've got to believe in what you're saying. And if every time they look at what your output is different, that's not going to breed consistency over time. So although it might feel monotonous,
you'll get bored way earlier than anybody else will.
You just got to trust the process. And like all processes, how do you measure success? Like, it's all well and good, like having a plan and hopefully this is a good plan, and you build some consistency and you say, right, okay, for 12 months, this is the narrative we want to build. These are the people we want to speak to. This is the way we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And you set out on that journey. How do you understand at the end of that process or through that process that what you're doing's working?
Okay. So I use there's a 4 sort of stage or 4-step process for measurement, or 4 sets of different metrics. Maybe that's the easiest way to do it. And you can put them on levels.
Okay.
So level 1, you can just say, okay, I've put out all these outputs, all this communication, case studies, stories, interviews, podcast episodes, whatever. I've put myself out into the world. I've communicated. How many people have I reached? So the first, it's the 4 R's, I call them. So the first R stands for reach. How many people have I reached through that? And there are all sorts of ways that you can figure that one out. Fine. But that really doesn't tell you very much, other than you were very noisy and potentially quite a lot of people saw it or heard it.
But it's a start. I mean, you got to know if you're not reaching people, because if you're speaking to an audience of 1, you know.
No, but that audience of 1 might have been your business objective.
You know what? That's actually really true. And, you know, and a lot of people that aren't in enterprise communication, for example, don't appreciate there can be a lot of effort going in to build a story around one individual, because that one individual is so important to your engagement with something. So
I know a business that does exactly that.
Yeah.
They stalk. They literally stalk an individual who they see as particularly influential, or that major customer that they want to get into. They follow them everywhere. They go to every event they go to. They look at everything they post on social media. They just research them inside out. They then go off and create a piece of content which is utterly directed at that one person. They publish it
without being stalky.
Without being stalky. Don't break any laws, please. Do not rummage through any bins. They publish this content as if it's, ta-da, we've done this. And they find a way of sort of accidentally dropping it in front of someone, you know, tagging them in on something. It's all designed for that one person to see.
Or even building narratives for the people around that one individual. So they're hearing the same thing from different people around them.
So
and coming to kind of...
brings on...
So
that's our
probably jumping ahead.
No, so that's our R's.
So reach is like, okay, first thing, like in normal circumstances, if you're not big enterprise, stalky, one big CEO or COO of X, most of us are communicating to a broader set of people generally. So we're trying to get to as many of them as possible. So that's the first R.
Level 1, reach.
How many are we being effective in actually getting the message to as many people as possible?
And at least you're measuring something. That's good. Yeah. That's a really good start. Then you're looking for reaction. That's the second R. So when that information went out into the universe, what happened with it? This is where you're starting to get into the outcomes of your communication. So it's not just the output and how many people reached it, but now what's starting to happen with that. So again, at quite a simple level, a reaction could be a like, a thumbs up, maybe a share, maybe
so the kind of social media-y type, our understanding of,
or a click.
Yeah,
someone's clicked on something and read a bit more. You're beginning to get a sense that they're not just going, oh, that's noise, I'm not interested in that. They're actually now starting to sort of engage with that content. Then you're looking at the third R, which is the resonance. So they've reacted to it, but actually has this communication started to take on a life of its own? Is it starting to be shared or repeated by other people? Are you beginning to build a sense of a momentum around some of the messaging and the ideas that you're putting out into the world?
Yeah.
And then the fourth R, of course, is results. And this is where you can get deep into looking at long-term impacts or commercial sales, leads, inquiries, those sorts of results.
So on that reaction, that's where you'll start at the very basic level, like we said, of social media, that's likes and shares and that kind of stuff. But at a more fundamental level, is that you kind of getting also into your call to actions, where you might be driving people to do something, you know, sign up to a form, join a club, something, right? Yeah. So that's that. Is what I'm doing actually causing somebody to stop and react in some way at a very
Well, I
simple
call
level.
that a result.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's what you set out to do in the first place.
So that might be your result is just to get as many people to sign up to your doodah as possible.
That's a perfectly valid commercial objective. So actually, that's level 4. It's actually, did we achieve our objective? But there are these stages in between, and I differentiate reaction from resonance, because I think reaction is quite a quick, cursory engagement. Resonance is something different. Resonance is where you actually start, as I use this word momentum, you start to actually, your communication becomes an agent for change. And you know, when people talk about thought leadership all the time, I rant about this all the time, so forgive me. But, 99% of thought leadership is not thought leadership, it's just thought. It's a point of view on something that gets put out into the world, and it's tomorrow's fish and chip paper. It's failed to get resonance. It might have got a couple of thumbs up likes in our first hour on LinkedIn, but actually have all that effort that you've put in to sharing your expertise, has it fundamentally, built a coalition of interest and some sense of momentum behind it? And I when we were talking earlier, we talked about this concept of leadership is literally sat on that horse with the sword going, follow me, troops, and you don't want to be that thought leader who goes, follow me, troops, and look behind you and there's no one there. So what we try and do, and I do fundamentally believe that in the built environment, we are heavily reliant on our relationships and our supply chain, and on doing things collaboratively. There is no one organisation that can do everything. So actually looking for collaborations, coalitions, people who can get behind that communication and start to create genuine resonance. And you know when it's happened, frankly, because you go to a show like Future Build, where I've been today, you sit in a conference, one of the stage, settings, and one of the speakers references your work. And goes, there was a really interesting piece of work published by so-and-so, or I was at a talk the other day, and they'll tell a story about the story that you told. That's resonance.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier, and there can be a real subtlety to this, can't there? And I know you do this because you think about it so deeply at a strategic level, but it's all the way down to even hearing fragments of sentences and ideas that you've constructed in a way that when you're hearing it back, that there's a fingerprint to the communications that you're putting out there that you can see coming back to you, DNA fragments of those comms. That's resonance. That's when it's resonate. And I think all of us that have been in positions of lobbying and communications, or even sales, that salespeople will know this, that when you land, you start hearing yourself in the person that you're talking. That they're saying stuff to you, and you're going, I said that, like, we've never met, but that's what I say. And so you get this sense that something that you're putting out there is resonating. That's a golden metric, I imagine.
It's wonderful. It's the point where you see something take on a life of its own. We did a campaign. And I call it a campaign, it's more like a movement now. It started off very simply, a group of manufacturers who made fire doors wanted to basically get people to take fire door safety more seriously. Fundamentally, they wanted to sell more fire doors, but actually they were significantly worried about the quality of the products that were being installed, the quality of the installation, and therefore the risk and the issues. And this is pre-Grenfell. This is way before Grenfell. So we came up with the concept of Fire Door Safety Week. And it started off with a few organisations collaborating together with some consistent messaging, some consistent facts and figures about the state of fire door safety in the UK. We took that, we created creative stories, creative content, we used every channel we could, and we gave people the opportunity to sign up to Fire Door Safety Week. And if they did, then during that week they could create their own content and we would amplify their content as well, and it became a mutually supportive thing. And it went from, I don't know, about 10, 20 businesses to start with, to 120 businesses, to 300 businesses. We got the Fire Minister involved. We got the government Fire Kills campaign supporting it. We had fire and rescue services around the country doing activities. We had schools involved. We had social housing organisations involved. This thing grew from actually really small little campaign with some consistent messaging and some good materials, some factual stuff with a strong sense of purpose behind it, and therefore emotion to drive it. I mean, it's been going, I don't know how many years now, probably 8, 9 years, and it's still going strong. And that is genuine. That's genuine resonance now, because it's become a thing. It's in the diaries. If I talk to the editors of half a dozen trade mags, they'll tell me that in September they have scheduled this year a feature on fire door safety to coincide with that activity. And you just go, right, now we're getting somewhere. Now.
Does it take some skill and purpose to measure success in communications? I imagine, like, you have to know what you're doing. It's very difficult, and I'm guessing that's probably why a lot of people get so disheartened, because perhaps they don't have the structure going into it, but equally they're not necessarily understanding how to capture success. And like in any endeavor, you want to know that what you're doing is working, it's worth it. And there's a lot of effort goes into consistent communications. So you want to know that this is worthwhile, the effort. Is it quite difficult ultimately to measure success? Is there a certain amount of skill to it, or you've just got to have a plan you've got to think it through and go, how am I going to know what is my benchmark for success?
That's the first question. That's the first question. We'd say, right, what is your number one business objective, and how would we know if we've achieved it? And if you can answer that right at the start, then everything else is actually relatively straightforward. It doesn't mean that it might be time consuming, and as you can imagine, a business like mine is full of people who've got tools and techniques and software and tracking of everything that moves. So we try and measure everything as best we can, for the simple reason that our clients don't have bottomless budgets. They can't afford waste. So you've got to measure, you've got to hold yourself accountable to your clients and show the return on investment in communications. But also you've got to learn when something isn't working, and you cut that and try something different. So sort of yes and no. It can be quite complex. It's certainly time consuming. Sometimes it's expensive. But actually, there are usually sort of, what would I call them? Like proxy metrics sometimes that you can use. In an ideal scenario, you would do pre and post research. You go to your target audience, or however big it is, and you'd look at what they know about a topic, what they know and understand about air quality, what their awareness is, what their level of trust is in advisors. You'd go and do that research beforehand. You do your comms campaign for a year, 2 years, and you go back and research them again and see, have you shifted? But that's premium level evaluation. Actually, I would say you can use the 4 R's in the meantime, and you can find some proxy measures to say, actually, we think we can track this. And we'll see how it shifts over time.
We had I had Dan Hyde on for Everything is User Experience there.
It's brilliant.
And he makes the point, and he's he's right. Everything is user experience, like literally. And he says so often you're talking to clients, customers, the people that are listening to this podcast about something like a persona, for example. Do you know who your customer is? And they go, yeah. Have you actually ever spoken to one?
Yes.
You know, and you go, well, what do you mean? No, I sell to them all the time. I know them. Yes. But have you actually ever spoken to this person you're trying to communicate with? And it's amazing how often the answer is no, or very cursory, quick conversation with somebody who might vaguely be reminiscent of that type of person. But very rarely do organisations actually fundamentally understand the user. Yeah. And it's so fundamental to outcomes. And I guess you do a lot of that in comms. It's that, like, okay, yeah, but have you actually spoken? Like, have you got commentary and transcripts, and is there something I can read? Oh, no. Like John, the sales director, knows those people.
We don't have time
No,
necessarily.
I know.
So that's where we can come in, is we can advise them and say, actually, if you're looking to communicate to these people, you just might want to dial this down and dial that up.
Yeah.
So we can advise them on a lot of that. But yeah, I did a workshop not long ago with a client, and I was trying to get their marketing and sales teams to really understand who they were trying to talk to. And I got a load of white sports socks and wrote the names of their target customers on the toe of the socks. And in the workshop, I said, right, take all your shoes off, put your client's socks on. And I used it as a metaphor, but literally put your client's socks on. So you are Balfour Beatty, your Kia Construction, your Barrett Homes or whatever. And they literally had to wear their socks and say, right, now you personify that customer. Now, knowing what you know about that customer, look again at your communications, look again at your marketing, and give me your honest opinion about what you think is going to get their attention. And that was a point where you can tell the people who genuinely know their customers.
Yeah.
And those are actually are making a lot of assumptions.
Coming up with tropes.
Yes. And you've got to be very careful about that.
Yeah.
Because the most effective and exciting communications are when you accidentally stumble upon some insight. It's not accidental, sorry, but the point is you have some specialist insight into a type of customer, which is like, oh my God, that's genius. Why didn't, of course that is going to be the thing that will be different from what anybody else is saying, that will genuinely resonate with that audience, and where I can claim that. That's my territory. I can be a thought leader, a specialist, an expert in that area. So knowing the territory that you can own, and if it's based on genuine insights and knowledge and understanding of that customer that you're trying to reach, gold, pure gold.
Yeah. There's a book, you were saying that there was a book I was reading recently about negotiations and this idea of the black swan. And you never find it unless you actually have conversations with people. That there's always a thread in someone's life or story that if you can find and unpick, that's where the gold is. But you don't find it unless you can either walk in their shoes deeply or have those conversations with them. And that's a very well understood negotiation tactic, is trying to find that black swan in the story that gives you that leverage, is the hook you need to make that communication resonate with somebody.
And we've all been on the receiving end of someone who's got it wrong, haven't we?
Oh yeah.
Oh, hello, Liz. Yeah. So you're having a good day? Like, yes. Oh yeah, this is Chris from Widgets Inc. Yeah. So I was just wondering, what are you doing about your telecom system? Because obviously it's really important when you're on site, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've said there's
idea who I am.
And there's a technicality to a cold call, for example, that there's a process that people understand about walking people back off of a no and the ledge and so on. And you can have and understand that process and be a very good practitioner at it. And you can throw a lot of mud at the wall and enough will stick if you follow that process, that you can get some measure of success. But that ain't communications. That's using a known process to manipulate somebody into doing something that works, because we understand how communications work. And if you know that, you can walk somebody back from a no relatively well for most people. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to find ways of communicating things in more effective ways, to tell a story better, to resonate better with somebody. And this was the other question I was going to have you, that in air quality particularly, the challenge we have is that we're often trying to communicate risk. And risk is an interesting conundrum, because it's an esoteric something. There's a science behind risk, and there's epidemiology behind risk, and health behind, and all of that good stuff. And we've got things like the hierarchies of control, and things that people who listen to this podcast will hear me talk about ad nauseum. But risk communication is a certain something, isn't it?
It is,
and you've been involved in that for a while. And is it a fundamentally different approach, or is it just about, again, I guess it's about understanding who you're trying to communicate with and what resonates.
Yes.
But you're walking a particular line with risk communication, aren't you?
You are, and you have to be really careful. I should say there's an ethical responsibility around this. Everyone knows that, fear, anxiety, can be a powerful motivator for certain behaviours. But if you're playing on that and building up that, you're in very difficult ethical territory, I think.
Because you can do it, and you can manipulate that, and it will get a reaction.
Well, what do you think Trump's doing right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's exactly, we're being manipulated in this way with fear and anxiety, and he's using it as a very powerful weapon. I don't think it's an ethical way of behaving. I actually also don't believe in the long term it works very, very far. We've seen a lot of this with climate change communications.
Yeah.
For a very long time, it was, the planet's burning, the polar bears are dying, the bees are dying, the plants are dying, humans are dying. The end is nigh. And yes, to a degree, it will motivate certain people for a particular point in time. But actually, if you want to genuinely tackle tricky problems, actually, it seems to be at the moment proven to be much better to actually flip that, mention risk, but actually focus on reward.
Yeah.
Focus on reward. We're stronger as a species to respond to the opportunity of reward. So actually inspire, excite.
I'll have you back in just a minute. I just want to borrow you briefly to talk to you about 21 Degrees, a partner of the podcast. Formerly the Green Building Store, they were founded in 1995 by 3 exceptional building professionals, and the company grew out of their frustration with the poor availability of ecological building products. And I've known them for years as the go-to company in the UK for end-to-end design-led MVHR systems. You see, your home should do far more than just provide shelter and be energy efficient. If designed correctly, it'll be a far healthier and more comfortable environment. So whether you just want to start with a single product solution or need a comprehensive range of technologies to make your home more comfortable, 21 Degrees can help. In 21 Degrees, you won't find a more trustworthy, straight-talking, passionate about what they do, and approachable group of people. I speak a lot about the performance gap on this podcast and what we can achieve if we value ventilation highly enough. 21 Degrees embodies that sentiment for me. So if you're building a home, looking to install ventilation, or need to talk to experts in the field, I can't recommend them highly enough. Links are in the show notes at airqualitymatters.net, and you can find them at 21degrees.com. That's 21degrees.com. Now, back to the podcast. Yeah, I had Douglas Booker on the podcast, and he was talking about, he talks about air quality from the social justice angle. And social justice angle is interesting because particularly with air quality, it's often marginalised communities or poorer communities or communities from certain ethnic or religious backgrounds that suffer the consequences of poor environments, and the built environment's no different, really. But when it comes to communication, he makes the really valid point. We've got to be careful when we're communicating risk, because if someone doesn't have the agency to change that risk, then communicating risk without giving somebody the agency from change, it just builds anxiety and stress and hopelessness.
Yes.
Right? And ultimately it will get a reaction, that communication, but it's not for the good. It doesn't help. It may raise awareness, but you've got to find a way of communicating that risk in a way that holds some agency. And I think that's the challenge of risk communication, is that we're trying to tread this line where we're talking about often, again, this kind of wispy esoteric notion of risk to people that they understand and resonates with people, but in a way that they can do something about it. And again, I think that comes back to storytelling, because storytelling's a fantastic way of presenting the challenges of risk, but showing people a pathway through that, or a way to a better outcome, as opposed to just saying we're all doomed. I mean, we've all been this is being recorded in beginning of March, so I think the whole planet's doom scrolling at the minute with a sense of hopelessness, right? But we've got to find ways of telling stories and setting context for people to go, look, yes, this is a challenge, this presents a risk, but here's some examples of how people made this better as a result.
And if you're listening to this post-apocalypse, you can tell us that we got it all completely wrong.
That's very true. Yeah. The other interesting thing about risk for me is that the other interesting thing from a communication perspective, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this, is risk is rarely eliminatable. It's usually just mitigatable. So what I mean by that is we have to find ways of talking about it that reflects the nuance of risk. The risk in modern communications in the modern world is we get quite binary, black and white, good, bad, evil, good, that kind of thing. But genuine risk isn't like that. Like it's
messy, isn't it?
It's messy, and the built environment's messy, and particularly air quality is messy. You can do everything right and stuff can still go wrong. So how do you, like, when you're sitting down with a client and they're saying, right, we've got this technical solution, or we want to communicate this particular approach to something, but it's not straightforward. Like we don't genuinely know what an outcome is going to be. How do you kind of start to unpack that with people to say, right, okay, well, is it a case of just, right, okay, back to basics? What do you think good looks like? How do we get from here? Is it about just the basics of the strategy?
Yes. So let's make an assumption that I'm talking to a client who fundamentally wants to demonstrate their expert status in order to win trust and credibility with a potential client. They've got a technical solution which has been tried a few times. Not everything's worked perfectly along the way. There's been some hiccups, but they're getting better, and there's emerging good practice coming out of this that they're learning all the time. I would lean into that 100%, because what is the most credible story you can imagine? Most credible story for me is, we've got a vision, we've got this idea, we've got this technical solution, we had a fantastic client. They had a really tricky challenge. We tried it with them. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. And this is what we learned from it. These are the lessons we'd pass on to anybody else. If you're trying to do a project like this, don't make those mistakes that we made. Show your workings out. We all learnt it at school. Show your workings out. Share lessons, share knowledge. That demonstrates a degree of expert status. It demonstrates a degree of confidence. It's enormously high integrity, high trust building communications.
Yeah.
Very difficult for some organisations who are like, you never let the cracks show. You never admit that something hasn't gone right. But actually, no, you just need to build it into the story, and you can say ... to be continued.
Yeah.
And then you can come back to it later and go, you remember that story earlier and we'd hit this jeopardy moment, this crisis? Well, do you know what? We solved it. Together, working with our client, we found a solution, and our client has gone on and done these amazing things with it.
Is that to do with the world that you inhabit? Like, a little bit? I mean, you know, I know you're very passionate about, you know, you said we were kind of poking thought leaders a little while, but I know you love working with genuine thought leaders, and I know you love working with organisations that are forging new furrows and working for good and doing the right thing, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that we're talking about here, is that by the nature of the customer base that you occupy, or do you find yourself working for those naysayers and the grey men in suits that are just trying to kick cans down roads and obfuscate, and, you know, the other side of comms, which is, I know exists, right, because we come up against it. Are you at a point where you just don't work with those kind of organisations? You get to work with people that are passionate and are mission driven and, you know, trying to do the right thing.
That's where I focus my energy and my attention, and they're the people I want to work with. Sometimes we'll find ourselves working with an organisation that says they want to do this, but actually ultimately don't. And guess what? It's not a very happy relationship. It's not, and we don't get great results.
No.
When we were in COVID and we did lockdown, my colleague and I, Dan and I, did the Grenfell University Business Growth Programme, BGP. And it's like a sort of, you know, really intensive investigation into how you run a business, and it takes apart every section of your business, and you have to, you know, rebuild it, and then you do like a Dragon's Den type presentation at the end. And there's business counsellors that the university uses to challenge you about different things. And one of those counsellors kept saying to me, Liz, you need to be really clear, you know, who is your absolutely perfect ideal target market. You really need to know who, you know, where is your growth going to come from? What, you know, who are your best customers? And they showed me all these university ways of doing it. You know, so you can segment your customers by size, by geographical location, by the services they buy from you, by the fee level that they give you. And I would sit there night after night looking at this going, I can't see a pattern. I just can't see a pattern. My best work, they could be small, tiny business, you know, SME startup looking for, you know, Series A funding, through to global multinational business. You know, it just, there was no pattern. And then one day, it was a Sunday, and I'll never forget this moment. I'm sat in my study on a Sunday afternoon, and I looked at this list. I wrote out the list in 2 columns. The list of all the clients that we'd done good work for, perfectly professional, really fine. But then I had another list of the clients who I actually felt we'd done our best work for, and who I was still in touch with years later. And in fact, had created friendships and relationships that were going to, even when we'd stopped working together, I'd bump into them at Future Build or wherever. And I looked and I was like, that's interesting. I've got my happy clients, okay. But I've got the special ones that we did something really meaningful with, and I'm really proud of that work. What was the common denominator? And it suddenly dawned on me that all the ones that we'd done our best work with were the organisations who were purpose-driven. They had something else going on. They couldn't help themselves. Yes, they had commercial targets to meet. Yes, they had, sales directors, with clear plans. But actually, they fundamentally had a culture and a set of values, which was like, we will not rest until we've addressed this issue.
Yeah. And you can't buy that. Like that's either there or it isn't.
Yeah. So I went off to Grenfell the next day and I was like, I've got it. I've got it. I know who we were made for, who I was made to work with. And my team, and I came back to my team and I just said, I've nailed it. I know exactly why we are here, why this business was born, and where we're going to do our best work in future. And so now when we start working with a client, we'll ask questions about, so what is the impact you're looking to create? And if they say, oh yeah, we just need to double turnover, in the next 18 months. I go, no. But why?
Yeah.
What are you trying to do?
You're trying to get to the DNA, that certain something.
What is it that makes you get up in the morning and do that hard slog of running a business? Because it's just not easy. Tap into that, understand the why. And if you can find it, it's like, right, now we can help you with that.
And there's gold there, I think, in comms in general. I think particularly in ventilation and air quality, apart from a few bad players, it's a mission-driven environment.
I think it absolutely is.
Right? So there are people who are absolutely driven to make a difference, and air quality remains the single biggest environmental risk we face as a human species. So this is important stuff, and people are driven to make a difference. And listeners to the podcast would have heard people like Plum Stone on the podcast recently talking about air quality as an accessibility rights issue for people that are suffering with long-term illnesses. This stuff matters to people, and you can't buy that. And it's tapping into that is the gold, I think. So if you're an organisation in this space, whether it's an academic organisation trying to disseminate what you do better, or a commercial company trying to unlock markets and sell something is going to make a difference to people's lives.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot in this conversation for those types of people. How did you end up here? Not here talking to me at Future Build, because we love our chats, but in comms, in construction, because we were walking here this evening, and for listeners, it took twice as long as it should have taken to get here, because Liz kept stopping to take pictures of cranes. And I was like, every time I turned around, Liz had stopped and she was taking a picture of another random building, scaffolding. Clearly you were built for this. How? What was your kind of journey to finding yourself following me to do a podcast, taking photos of cranes and talking about comms for a couple of hours?
At this point, my family are wetting themselves, and so are all my colleagues, because they're like, "Oh God, that's her." Yeah. So. God, I mean,
I was looking back through LinkedIn, and I suppose the first obvious construction-y related role that you were doing was back NHBC days. Was it before that?
Oh yeah, no, it was before that. It was before that. So, actually, do you know what? I think it's. I did an English degree and I did a fine art degree, and my fine art degree, I spent 3 years drawing pylons, scaffolding and construction sites. So I find them visually, I just can't get enough of lattice steelwork structures.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. If that's my happy place, is to just look at lines and space between lines and
function and form.
I can get seriously nerdy about the aesthetics of scaffolding.
Yeah. So needless to say, like construction's in your blood. Like you just, there's something about it, something about buildings and.
Well, actually, literally in my blood, because I found out when I was in my 20s, I knew I'd been adopted, and I found my birth parents in my 20s, and it turns out that I have got construction. I had an uncle who was an editor of a construction journal. Okay. I had a grandfather who was a chartered surveyor.
Isn't that funny?
So nature, nurture, who knows?
Yeah.
But anyways, no, what happened was I thought I wanted to be a journalist and a writer, and then an artist. And I sort of lost my way. In your 20s, you try lots of different things. And after trying a couple of fairly disastrous short-term roles, I took a job working as a press officer, I think it was, for a firm of architects. And I thought it was going to be terribly visual and aesthetics, and I'd get to see lots of beautiful architectural drawings, and that would be my happy place back to where I was, in art college and stuff. And it wasn't. It was building physics, and it was specification, and it was land use policy, and it was interpreting briefs and the finance of development and all this stuff. And honestly, when that just moment happens in your life and that little light bulb goes off, I just thought, this is it. I'm just fascinated by it. And that's what's happened all the way through my career. Architects and planners. Then I went to work for a firm of PR consultants, where I got involved in energy efficiency and launched the first energy rating scheme in the UK. Worked with a whole load of different types of businesses, house builders, energy assessors. From there, I then went to the NHBC and was head of comms for the NHBC. So again, really got to understand a lot more about house building, the construction process, the risk in that, the insurance issues, the consumer protection issues. That's a really interesting overlap of construction and consumer protection is, again, a really interesting area for me.
Yeah, and I guess comes back in some of the later roles as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a theme that's gone through. Yeah. And then from NHBC, then I went to a big London agency and did some big stuff with, big property development initiatives and things. And then I was married and had just had my first daughter, and found out that we were moving house. Literally found it, and then thought, well, that's it. I'm going to set up on my own, and I was off and away. Yeah, never looked back. It was brilliant.
That was the start of Nismail Consultancy.
Yeah, that was nearly almost 25 years ago now.
Yeah, and when you set that up, at the same time, you've also had some really significant roles in organisations that have had big impacts in our built environment, like Trustmark, and Each Home Counts, the Bonfield Review, and National Energy Foundation, like real pillars of what I think, if you're from the UK, you come to understand have been really important organisations, one way or the other, and for good and bad over the years, in us finding ourselves where we are now. Yeah. So like Trustmark, you were involved with for quite some time, weren't you? The iteration before the one we kind of have now that looks over PAS 2035 and things that people know about here right from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, so I funny enough, I met the new COO of Trustmark today, and I was chatting to her and I was telling her the history that I know. And I remember the day that the Department for Trade and Industry, as was, phoned us up one day and said, can you help? We're trying to set up a new government-backed consumer protection scheme in the repair and maintenance improvement, home improvement sector, domestic RMI. And we need to launch this in the next couple of months, and we've just found out there's some major problems with branding and comms and all that sort of thing, and can you help us? And I was like, yeah, we can do that. So we took that on as a client. The CIOB were very much a real force in that right at the beginning. So I think they'd helped to sort of introduce us to the department, and we took on that contract to set up what became Trustmark. The government had suffered a hideous experience with a scheme called Quality Mark. They beforehand, they failed massively. So they were not prepared to go through that experience again. They needed a new model. There was a really interesting guy called Dan Bernard who brought together various trade associations and industry bodies, and we worked with them. And we created this Trustmark scheme. We did a launch to the industry, to trade associations. I think it was November 2005, so it will be 20 years ago this year. And then we did a huge consumer PR push and launch to the consumer market in January 2006.
But more than that, you chaired it as well.
Well, that was phase one. That was my
Okay.
experience with Trustmark.
Okay.
And then we helped Trustmark build their own in-house capabilities, their own in-house marketing manager, and we just basically helped them set up that infrastructure, because it was literally a tiny startup at that point, but albeit with a government license and a lot of clout, and the support of some really forward-thinking trade bodies who decided to collaborate to make it happen. Back to collaboration and resonance again. But then we stepped away from it. I stepped away from it. My team stepped away from it for probably about, 3-4 years.
Because your job was kind of done. You did your setup.
I'd done my client piece of client contract. Had completed. Happy days. Won loads of awards for it. Measured before and after. Could prove what we'd achieved. And then about 2010, I get approached to say, Liz, you sort of know construction and you know the different trade bodies, and you were involved in Trustmark, and we're looking for an independent chair. So someone who knows the industry but hasn't actually got any vested interests in any one of the organisations.
Okay.
Will you put your hat into the ring? And I'd done a little bit of non-exec work with the Construction Youth Trust and a couple of other organisations that I'd done some voluntary work for. And I found that was my, sounds a bit cheesy, but that was like my growth edge. I was learning more from some of those interactive activities those interactions, with those boards and those organisations than I was probably learning from my day-to-day client work. So I thought, why not? Put in my CV, got the job. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So went out to everyone who'd been involved in Trustmark since 2005 and just asked them the question, what's working for you? What's missing? What do we need to do differently? And back came all of this stuff. So I went back to the minister and said, do I have your permission to tear up the master licence and start again? A new licence from the Department for Business, a new set of core criteria, core standards at the heart of the scheme, some marketing budget, can we have a bit more government support? And please, Minister, can you just turn up to a few things and say a few helpful words? Because it's like scattering fairy dust over some of the people. Yeah,
interesting.
And it worked. It really, really worked. And so I was chair of Trustmark for 7 years while still running my PR business. But what it did was it gave me the opportunity to develop my non-exec career. So I now do lots of other non-exec activities. And it's still my growth edge. I'm still learning all the time from those experiences.
And was it that your time at Trustmark that got you the MBE as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was for services to construction and consumer protection.
Wow.
Because that's what Trustmark fundamentally was trying to do.
Yeah.
It was trying to, and so it was, let's be honest, it was a reflection of where Trustmark had got to and the relationships and the support it had from trading standards bodies and all the trade associations and different tribes and certification bodies that were involved in it. Trustmark was and is still, at this point in time, a collaborative change initiative.
Yeah. And it in its way a reflection, and always will be a reflection of industry. Any organisation, umbrella organisation that is involved in quality in construction is going to reflect the times that it's in to some degree. And little did you know, I suppose, back then, that you would then go through the Each Home Counts or the Bonfield review, and the Trustmark would then consequently become so central tenement to managing the outcomes of that review.
So,
and that was a real peeling back of the industry, that process. And anybody, will share a link in the show notes for this. There's a great video that you did, I know, with Peter Rickaby, where you really unpacked that period of time. Because it was really fundamental, I think, for particularly in retrofit, a lot about what we understand around risk now in this sector, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think collaboration isn't easy. It's messy. We know construction, as I say, it's not a single industry. It's not one organisation can do everything. It's coalitions. It's relationships that are forged and then break down, unfortunately, and need to be reforged over and over. And Trustmark sits at the heart of that messy middle, where you are trying to balance lots of different competing interests and areas of concern. And you've got to find a way to tap into the core purpose, the core shared values. What is it that makes us work together as opposed to pull us apart? If you can harness that energy, you can then use that to address societal failures, like, call them cowboy builders and scammers, and frankly, they're not builders at all, they're just criminals. So you can address societal ills through criminal activity, you can address societal ills through failed retrofit. And I don't believe, can I say those two things are very separate? I don't see them as the same thing. I do not call a failed retrofit the result of a cowboy builder, necessarily.
Yeah.
In some cases it was. And where at Each Home Counts, we were presented with evidence of, frankly, just criminal behaviour and fraud.
Yeah.
And the government knew that it was utterly politically and societally unacceptable for taxpayers' money to go into supporting big retrofit programmes where there was that underbelly of activity.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between poor outcomes as a result of lack of knowledge and skills and training, and poor outcomes as a result of malintent, non-professionalism. Talking to David Pierpoint about this last night, that there's that professionalism is key, and people that are professional, they care about outcomes, and they'll even work against lack of knowledge and understanding and skills and still get a good outcome because they care about results. They'll find a way of making it work. Whereas at the other end of the scale, and a lot of the stuff that came out of the Bonfield review, was that the other end of that scale of organisations, that it's that my job's done here, and people walking away from stuff that you can't believe somebody looked at that and went, I've done a job. We see this, and anybody that follows me, and particularly Nathan Wood from BISA, is a litany of images and pictures of ventilation systems, in his case, where somebody has walked away from that and thought, I've done my job. And it's for people that are mission driven and care about this stuff, that's
not enough.
You just can't understand how it doesn't take skills and knowledge to know that that's just not good enough. Yet it happens over and over and over again. And that's why it's so important for organisations like Trustmark to exist. And they'll always get a hard time, I think, because by the nature of what they do, they are the interface of consumer protection and a very big, broad, technical, complex, messy world.
Yeah.
And as a result, they're going to have a lot of mopping up to do, and always will be, to be fair.
Yeah.
But essential, absolutely critical as a role.
Yeah.
There's a lot of jurisdictions that don't have that, actually, Liz. That organisation that found itself as an umbrella organisation. And a lot of, like, Ireland's a really good example. We're even now, 20 years on, probably about the same time, we had a boom in the early 2000s where we produced some really poor buildings. This is new build sector, and there was lots of inquiries and things came out of it. It's only, I think, this year that finally the umbrella consumer protection quality organisation has been set up.
Really? That's fascinating.
That long. Don't ask me why, but it's just, and there are other jurisdictions that are the same, yet we did seem to get there. And one of the interesting things, I think, for me about the Each Helm Count review is it got people thinking in terms of managing risk in retrofit, particularly. That was the birth of things like PAS 2035 that started to go, right, okay, how do we produce a structure that can collect, because not everything is going to be a holistic one-off big retrofit where you're taking it from a really bad place to a good place. Most buildings are on a journey over a period of time. And how do we build a structure that can manage quality in that environment and deal with the challenges of this year PV's the hot topic. 2 years ago it was heat pumps or whatever, air source machines or whatever. So you've got to have some underlying structure and organisation that's got consumer protection, that's got policies and quality control. It has to exist, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It has. And minimum common standards. And what Each Home Counts did, which was so powerful, and I think full credit goes to Peter Rickaby for this, was this whole house understanding. That yes, you don't have to do, not everything will be a whole house retrofit, but if you take that lens, if you look through the work that you're doing through that lens, it changes everything.
I think you and me have been very lucky in our careers to, and I think I suppose most people can point to this, but I count myself very lucky to have known people like the Peter Rickabys, the Chris Saunders, the Neil Mays, real visionaries in the sector that, I'll get emotional thinking about Neil May.
Oh, I know. Me too. Me too.
Let's try not to go down that one. But people that have both understood the sector, like, talk about knowing your personas. People like Peter and Neil and others knew deeply how people in the sector worked. Mm-hmm. But they're also philosophers and systems thinkers that were able to pull strands together in a way to come up with these approaches that make the difference. But going back to the communications, none of that works unless you've got a way of communicating it effectively. And like, nothing's going to put you to sleep faster than a PAS 2035 document, I can tell you. And this is
dear.
But it's true, isn't it? And I was only saying this to a regulator the other day, is really the pinnacle of our expectations, going all the way back to the first question, is the pinnacle of our expectations for communications when it comes to things like standards, a 55-page PDF document that, quite frankly, even if you're really into it, like I know you and I are, you struggle to read those things. Like, they are hard graft, particularly if you want to understand them, because they take you off in different directions to different standards, and that they're a clusterfuck of information often, just by the nature of they're consensus documents often, which means there's lots of confounding ideas in them and standards to reach. Is that really where we are? There's got to be, I just get this sense that there's got to be a new way of communicating. We complain constantly that people aren't able to meet the standards that we provide. Yet the pinnacle of our comms around these standards is buried in almost unnavigatable texts. So is it any wonder, quite frankly, that nobody knows what ADF is on about? Because have you ever tried reading ADF from start to finish? I was saying to Peter Rankin about it. I said, I love ADF. Like I've probably read it as much as most people have, and even now I still find something in it that I didn't pick up the last time I read it.
Yeah.
And that's me. Like, so if I'm still picking stuff up on it, what hope has most of everybody else got? And I think that's where there's real potential in communications, is unlocking new ways to resonate and find the stories and to bring those dull, dreary, technocratic documents to life in ways that we can drive the outcomes that we want.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And we're suffering exactly the same issues with the new building safety regime, the new Building Safety Act, all the subsequent legislation, all the new standards coming through that. The industry is just reeling from data information overload, and yet at the same time is saying, it's not clear, I don't know what you expect me to do. The industry is pushing back and saying, we're not getting sufficient information, the communication's not clear enough.
Yeah. There's the intent, isn't there? And then there's the technical detail, and you know, big movements like the Building Safety Act you're always going to find holes in it for some people or some parts. But if we're not getting if the intent isn't clear, the story and the communication behind it isn't clear, you're not going to roll people in behind it to go, you know what, it's not clear there, but we'll find a way through that. They'll just point to the technical problem and ignore the intent.
How did you learn your most complex algebra at school? Was it sitting there reading a textbook, going over and over and over it on your own, trying to figure it out? No. Somebody sat with you and found the motivation, the thing inside of you where that communication would resonate. I mean, I can say this personally, dreadful at maths at school until that one teacher, you know, we all have that hero teacher, who found a way to explain it and drew it. For me, it had to be communicated visually.
Found a way through. And
I managed to fly through with a good grade in my maths. That came down to good communication, knowing who it is that you're talking to and finding a way to engage with that person in a way that really means something to them, that resonates with them, and understanding how to communicate actually something that's really quite complex and make it simple. And then guess what? It sticks in my mind and I'm off and away.
And this stuff matters. You know, the Building Safety Act matters. It was born out of a tragedy and a system that was broken. And this stuff matters in the same way the conversations we have on this podcast matter.
Yeah.
So we have to find ways through, and communication is how we do that.
Yeah, we have a responsibility to take our expert knowledge, take our superpowers, and what was that wonderful quote? What is it? Something like, the purpose of life is to find out your superpowers, and the meaning of life is to give them away.
Yeah,
I've misquoted that, but it's that idea: find out what you are the best in the world at, become an expert in it, and then use your communication skills to share that knowledge and to communicate that and to make the world a better place as a result.
Yeah.
And use whatever communication tools, resources, time that you have, and every organisation will do it in a different way. Yeah. And that's fine, but just keep going, stay consistent, don't stop, just keep going and sharing that.
And the clearer we can communicate these things, the more likely we are to find the right people to do this work. Did you see, I mean, because I can only imagine you were following it quite closely, the kind of Grenfell inquiry stuff. And there was that press conference that the three leaders of the Grenfell inquiry, and it was the lady who spoke.
Judith Hackett. No. I know.
You know the lady, yes. I mean,
yes.
I can't think of her name. I'll see if I can find the video clip of it for the show notes as well. But something she said stuck with me, and the Grenfell has clearly affected this lady. You could see when she was talking, this was to sit through the Grenfell inquiry must have been an enormous responsibility.
Yeah.
But she said, and I remember it really clearly, she said, look, we understand that the Grenfell inquiry and the Building Safety Act and what we're going to be asking of the industry is onerous and is complex and is going to be asking a lot of you. But if you don't understand how important building safety is, you're in the wrong business and you need to get out.
Yes.
And the hair stood up. Talk about communicating.
Yes.
This was a woman who had sat through I can't even imagine what she'd sat through. And it was almost a straight to camera moment. She said, if you don't understand the gravity of the situation and the responsibility you have, you are in the wrong industry. This isn't the industry for you.
Totally.
And I thought that was amazing. Yeah, as a comms piece, the world's changing, and I'm afraid this is the wrong space for you. But if we don't find a way of communicating the DNA, the intent, the mission, the purpose-driven element of what we're doing, there are several consequences of that. One is you don't get to communicate effectively what you're trying to say. But the other thing is you don't get to bring on board the people that you need to make the changes that you want.
And to grow.
We don't get to reach them.
Yeah. No, honestly, let's take Grenfell as an example. We're 7 coming at 8 years post that tragedy. I think a large part of the industry thinks that it's history, it's over, there's nothing to see here anymore. Others feel that there's a lot of change still to be addressed and are very frustrated at the pace of change and they want to see things go further. But if you ever lose sight of why it's important, my top tip, go to the National Theatre at Home website and go and look at a recording of a play that was at the National Theatre. I think it was called Grenfell Stories or something like that. It's got Grenfell in the title, so you're not going to miss it. It's not a long play, but watch that piece of theatre. I swear to God, it's the most powerful piece of theatre I have ever seen in my life on this planet. It left me just knowing completely that this can never happen again, and that whatever ability I have as a human being, I've got to play my part in helping to, make a difference and so make sure that doesn't happen again.
And another tip from me is if you're into books, the Peter App's Show Me the Bodies,
yes,
unbelievable piece of storytelling that, and he intertwined stories with a timeline with the technical detail in a way that, as it happened, I had it both in books and on audio.
Yes.
And I was listening to it in the car, and I've never had an audio book where I've actually had to pull over at certain sections.
Yeah.
Because I was either in pieces, emotionally, or so cross I was going to do some damage on the road. Unbelievable Peter story. Grenfell is a lesson, I think, in unchecked what can happen in the built environment. And I think it shows what slow creep looks like as well, which I think is really important from a comms perspective. And for those of us from industry, we've all been in those meetings where we find regulations or standards obstructive, and rightly so. We're trying to find ways to navigate that, but it's a slow creep from that to trying to find ways to navigate around it, or to obfuscate and can kick, or to find ways of communicating to sow doubt. Doubt is our whatchamacallit, the tobacco thing.
Yeah.
Doubt is our weapon. So I can't quote.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how that creeps in. And people look to those big organisations and say, and those emails that went round and the horror stories that are associated with it, and wonder how did they end up there? Well, you don't end up there overnight. You end up with over years and years of thinking that you're fighting an enemy you're not, and justifying the unjustifiable ultimately. And I don't think anybody ever wants to be in an inquiry like Grenfell justifying the emails that we saw being circulated.
But actually, look at what some of those organisations did. You know, you've got the organisations who went, do you know what, that was wrong, and we don't know possibly how we ended up here, but we recognise there was mistakes made, and we completely hold our hands up to that, and that can never, and we will make sure that never happens again. We're going to put into place whatever systems and processes needed. Now, I would say this because I've been, you know, working with LABC, but they're a classic example in point where they just said that was just not right, and looking back, we can't defend it, but we're going to be open. We're going to share with you what we know. We're going to cooperate with the inquiry, and we're not waiting to legislation. We are making the changes straight away, and we want to be part of the solution. Then you've got the other businesses that are going, well, we don't accept responsibility for this. That wasn't our job. That was somebody else's job. Our job finished here. We had no responsibility for that bit.
Demarcation, obfuscation, you know.
Nothing to see here, nothing to learn. Siloing.
Yeah, all of that stuff, you see it. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's the classic thing that everyone says, you can mess up. It's how you deal with it that matters. And you can actually build more trust in a brand by how you're seen to respond to a crisis and how you're seen to respond to a mess up, than if you go basically in denial. No.
Do you find yourself, like, by the nature of being in comms, that you find yourself in those firefighting roles where you're actually having to advise and strategic? Because you know, there's the technical comms part of firefighting, obviously, but behind that is a structural element to say, right, okay, what are you actually accepting, or what's the position? Like, you must be involved in those conversations.
A lot of crisis communications. I have done all the way through my career.
You can't be in construction and communications without being in. And I say there's another. I think we'll have to leave that for another podcast. But I'd say we'll do a part 2 of crisis comms with Liz Mail.
Oh my God!
Then we'll get some stories.
No, I can't. Well, those are the stories I probably can't tell.
No,
but no, you're right. There's a whole thing where you're keeping people out of the media and helping organisations deal with that. But it's the same principles, Simon. It's the same principles about. Know what's the outcome that you're looking for, know who you need to be talking to, show integrity, tell stories, prove that you're doing the best you possibly can, share lessons, share knowledge, even of cock-ups, you know, be open.
Yeah.
The lawyers hate it, by the way, but PR people know that this is how you achieve trust and respect and ultimately, you know, make a difference in the world.
Liz, it's been amazing talking to you, as it always is. It's probably no surprise to anybody. You're a great communicator and able to bring this subject matter to life. And I hope, you know, people and listeners get something out of it, because I think we all of us are mission driven in some way, and we're trying to communicate what we're doing. So thanks a million. I really appreciate your time.
And can I just say huge, you know, snaps to you, what you do and the podcast and the issues you're looking at. And again, your communication skills, spot on. Well done.
Thanks a million. Cheers. Thanks for listening. Before you go, can I ask a favour? If you enjoyed the podcast and know somebody else who might be interested, do spread the word and let's keep building this community. This podcast was brought to you in partnership with Erico, ACO, Ultra Protect, Imbiot and 21 Degrees, all great companies who share the vision of the podcast and aren't here by accident. Your support of them helps them support this show. Do check them out in the links and in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel by the same name, with plenty more content due to come on that channel. Thanks very much. See you next week.